I asked our venture capital guys. These are the guys that expect classically 100x unicorn returns. I want to exit in 6 years and make $1 billion. That's the normal Silicon Valley venture capital guys. I asked our guys before we took their check of, they led our finance round. I said, hey, if Techless exists in 30 years, you don't have an exit, but we're meaningfully changing lives in powerful ways and shifting culture. Are you okay with your cash staying in here? And they said, bring it on, Chris. We would love that if you ever join.
Thanks so much for checking out Culture Proof. I'm Miki.
And I'm Will.
And today we are having a sit down with Chris Kaspar, who is the founder of Techless. This is the company that's changing the world. The question is, can your ideas change the world? Yes. Yes. If they are ideas that come from a place that, maybe they're eternal. Maybe the thought is that you do ideas. Something that has an eternal impact.
Yes.
We believe so. So we're going to have a conversation with Chris Kaspar. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you taking out time. I know that Wise Phone 2 is rolling out and we'll talk all about that. And so I know you guys are busy, but thank you for joining us.
Oh, I'm honored. I love you guys. Your hearts are amazing. We have a lot of the same goals and our purposes in life align. We are at the intersection of culture with technology. So I'm so excited to be here and looking forward to this conversation today.
Oh, man, I think it's going to be a great one. So why don't we start with kind of giving just a little bit of a background? I feel like it's such a big question to say to someone, who is Chris Kaspar? But I feel like we kind of need to maybe start there in some way.
Yeah. High level, I come from a family of entrepreneurs. We're talking 5th generation family business that I had the privilege of working at for a season. And I had this cool blank page moment where I said, hey, I could be doing something more than just making money for the family business, although we were doing some wonderful things there. And I said, if I could do something around technology, cell phones, this is the most intimate relationship we have with technology, then maybe we could move the needle in a meaningful way for the kingdom of God. And so I dove in 5-6 years ago, and I'm happy to unpack much more on the who is or what's happened there, but that's it, high level. I'm passionate about what we're doing, and I think we can make a difference here. So
yeah, I think so too.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your testimony, because we kind of live in a time where you kind of your feelers are out in the culture as a Christian. You're trying to figure out, what does everybody believe? And it seems like there's do people really have a conversion story where they're really followers of Christ? Or is it sort of a cultural thing where you've just grown up around Christianity? What is your testimony? How did you come to know Jesus?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say I hop on a lot of podcasts. No one's asked me that yet, which is amazing to be able to unpack that. I mean, what's the purpose of life but to be light and share the gospel? We're reading through 1 Corinthians right now, and he says, hey, you're just distracted by all the secondary theology. Like, let's get back to the gospel. So thanks for asking the question. I have probably I don't know. I guess I have an atypical story. I come from an amazing family, multiple generations, all the way back to 1450 in Switzerland. People that knew the Lord. We're talking missionaries, pastors, chaplains, like people that lived at that intersection of commerce and faith. And so I look at my family tree and there's literally no divorces any direction. And so
oh my goodness.
Yeah, I really have been handed this wonderful platform to build on as far as just family and legacy. I mean, even a little bit of a dynasty, if I'm to be bold or courageous around that word without sounding pretentious. But my own personal faith, I grew up, I have amazing parents that love the Lord. I've always wrestled with church a little bit. I've always been slightly disappointed with the atypical church and what it means. I've led a home church, my wife and I have, but we live out our faith very sincerely. We sacrifice a lot. We consider ourselves, we really work hard in the local Shiner community of a town of 2,000 people to be one of the core people of faith here in the town, and do a lot to kind of bring people in and together events and things around the faith-based side of things. But I don't know if that answers the question. I don't have this very absolute clear conversion type of moment in my life, but I think if you follow the trail of fruit, I pray that God sees that it's his fruit and not worldly fruit, but the wake behind us and on our family. I've got 6 kids. A couple of them are starting to get to know the Lord very well, but we're deeply, deeply intentional about our faith in our lives. And so I can get into some specific stories that validate the faith and how I've seen God work if you want, but that's the high level overview here. So
no, that is great. I love it. And I got to tell you, it's encouraging to hear that, because, as we are also raising 6 children, and they are growing up in an environment where, if they continue to follow after the Lord, they don't have to have a whole lot of those war stories. And that doesn't like validate our walk with the Lord. I mean, it's great to have this story of having like a dynasty, that you come from a family that like got it right. I mean, that is incredible. And I think,
and even when you look in the scripture, that it was supposed to be handed down through the family, the faith, that's the first stop for the gospel. And so when you see families doing what families are supposed to do, Christian families, that's great. You can avoid many pitfalls and things like that. It does not mean that life is easy. But man, to be discipled in the home and to see godly parents, man, that's awesome. That's awesome.
So, and I just on a side note, I just got to tell you, this is so cool. This last week, I called a meeting of our family, and we had 8 people who were believers within the greater Kaspar family, not my direct one. And we got together, and we were literally having a 3-day intensive strategy session, saying, "Hey, how can we as a family instill these values into the next generation?" So we're aligned on that. We're working on it. We're talking about it, and we are not perfect by any means. There were moments where stepped on each other's toes, and the history isn't perfect. But anyways, I just want to say there's something beautiful about what you just said, and we're trying. So,
man, I love that. I love that. I and you were talking about fruit earlier, Chris, and I just kind of want to use that maybe as a springboard to go into how you came to start Techless. And I don't necessarily want to start with the genesis of the company. I kind of like to look at a little bit of your personal life and kind of getting into fostering, kind of like that as the catapult into Techless, because I feel like there's just an incredible story in there that I'd love for our listeners to hear.
Yeah, totally. And I think that story is kind of built into the genetics, I would say, on some levels. So back in the day, my great-great-grandfather invented the wire shopping cart, and he did that out of an excess of materials when barbed wire was invented, and like twisted together some wire. And anyway, so there was this moment in the market where there was excess stuff and there was opportunity, and he noticed it and said, let's do that and dive into that. And honestly, for me, when it comes to the foster kids piece, my wife and I have had 7 kids come and go in our house. We've did foster care for a long time. We're not doing it right now because we have 6 bio kids, and that's enough. But before that, there was this moment where he had 10 and 13-year-old girls. They were sisters, and they were in our house, and we loved them dearly. But I remember this moment where the caseworker, the first day, that's always the most critical. The first day and the last day are like the emotional moments for fostering. And the very first day, the caseworker dropped them off and said, "Hey, these girls have done really dark stuff with cell phones. They've taken pictures of themselves and sent them to 45-year-old men, and this isn't good. And they weren't wearing enough clothes, and it was just like a bad situation." And I went from having no teenager ever in my life to being faced with the classic conundrum that parents of teenagers have, maybe a more extreme version of it, but it's this question of, how do I love my kid who wants freedoms, used to freedoms, this type of thing, and at the same time not be this jerk, a stick in the mud, a Luddite, whatever that label is, and that tech tension that everyone faces. And so that was the catalyst of this question. And around that time, I was working at the family business. We were doing this thing called Lean, which is design business thinking around improving processes. And one of the concepts of Lean is error proofing things. And error proofing is where you make a system that prevents what you don't want to happen from not happening. So a very simple example is you create a door that you forget to lock all the time. Well, you install a lock that automatically locks, and all of a sudden you can never forget to lock the door. And if you put an automatic closing, then it just automatically latches and it closes, and you don't have to forget about it anymore. So that's an error-proof system. Well, I was chewing on that and designing these systems for business, and I had these foster daughters. I'm like, how can we error-proof technology for them? And as a test, we gave them Amazon Alexa, the tube with the speaker and music and
Yeah.
everything.
Yes.
And I was like, hey, this is a non-visual interface to the internet. They can talk to it, but they can't take pictures, look up stuff, whatever. Let's give it to them and have no restrictions whatsoever. Here you go, have fun. And they plugged in all over the house and ran over and listened to Beyonce. I will always love you a million times. My ears were hurting, but that was the worst of it. But the catalyst, the moment for me, when it all clicked, is that when we gave them that device and the freedoms associated with it, and the device had boundaries around it, our relationship with them got really good. It deepened our relationship. And all of a sudden, this was no longer the distraction that so many parents face with their teens and everything. And it was tech with boundaries around it that enabled us to live out the greatest two commandments, loving God, loving others, and enabled them to live it out more. And I was like, that's a very powerful principle. Could I do that on a broader scale, bring that to the world and help create technology with boundaries that are healthy for us, that follow God's designs and God's principles, and deepen this relationship we have with one another? So that's the overarching catalyst story tied into foster care.
Wow.
I mean, that's amazing, right? Like, I mean, if you just think for a second that what you really envision is something that is in response to what you are actually experiencing. I feel like a lot of the advances that we have valued in generations past have been the result of, like, I'm really trying to meet a need. I'm not just trying to make a business. Like, I'm trying to meet a need. And you mentioned this tech tension, and I kind of want to go back to that, because I feel like, I mean, that's almost like the foundation of the arguments that exist between parents and their kids. You've got the parents who they are, you would imagine, from another generation, where there's a different interaction with technology. There's a different use, a different respect, a different understanding. And then you've got the kids who they are technology natives. It's all they've ever known. And they feel a level of comfort, and maybe even they feel entitled to have a certain access to technology. And it does create, just like you said, it creates a tension. How do you guys navigate that through Techless?
Yeah. So first and foremost, calling out what you said, their expectation for technology, that entitlement, that's a cultural expectation that is a broad, overarching, very scary, dark, bad thing. Like, kids feel entitled to tech. I mean, we had a knockout, drag out with Google over kids' privacy rights. They believe firmly that kids have the right to privacy. And I believe firmly that parents should be able to see kids' locations and what they're messaging. Of course, in an umbrella of trust and transparency, I want my wife to see everything that happens on my phone. That's a healthy relationship. And so there are huge philosophical expectations that have been handed to us from Silicon Valley that kids have bought into, that have made this question very muddy, very complicated, if that makes sense. So
yeah, it does.
Now, how do we navigate it with Techless? We're doing a lot. There's education. There's a handful of things. One, we just did this thing 2 weeks ago in the town of Shiner called the Town Detox, where we as a town came together and asked kids, and they volunteered to lock their smartphones in a golden safe, and they were using a Wise phone for the whole semester. AKA, we're celebrating wisdom around technology instead of being ridiculed for it, which is the default. I mean, there's an example on the education side. We're working with some folks, a group called the Healthy Tech Index, and actually in a week and a half, we're going to have this thing live where we're actually rating apps on how good or bad they are for you from a healthy perspective. How good are they for your spirit, your soul, your mind, everything, and feeding in research. And that lays plain, here's why this stuff is terrible for us. If you look at the Apple App Store and 80% of the apps are an F rating, it's yeah, it's bad for us. And so there's an educational component there. And then literally the technology that we create is deeply, deeply intentional. The design behind it, the UX behind it, the philosophies behind it. And even if people don't understand everything that we're doing behind the scenes, we hope that you can trust it out of the box day one. And so you can see there's multifaceted approaches for different people and different places in their journey, but that's the way we're going about this from an educational standpoint, and just building technology that is healthy, and just trust that. So
yeah. That's so good. Okay. So Chris, tell me this then, why can't I just get a Google phone and then just put some, parental protection measures in place? Like, why can't I just block here, restrict there? I've got an Apple
Yeah.
phone. Why can't I get, be like super hover mother over the phone and just have that work? Why do I need an entirely different way to interact with technology?
The short answer is that you can go get the PhD in how to lock down your child's iPhone. You can do the 28-step process. You can stay up to date on the news, and when Apple pushes a software update, go close up the new vulnerabilities, and you can be the helicopter mom that is constantly badgering and nudging and negotiating with your kids if you want. I don't want to do that.
I don't want to do that.
I would. So in the deeper question, that was the sarcastic answer. The real answer, is that you have to understand why Google made their phone. Google gave Android to the world. Here's a whole mobile operating software where they put millions and millions of dollars into developing, and they said, "Here you go for free." Why did they do that? The reason why I went and hacked an Android and took it down and took away everything and brought it down to the most bare bones minimum. I turned off the clock on the top and it did nothing. Just the simplest phone. And the one thing I couldn't remove was the Google search bar. And you're like, oh, wait a second. It's because they make money off of my eyeballs on the screen. And then you look at the financial metrics, and the Play Store and the Apple App Store make billions of dollars. This is like a massive percentage of the company's revenue. Again, eyeballs on screen, monetization. It would be illegal for these companies to change their policies to disincentivize you from using your phone. They are financially stuck. And so from a trust perspective, just know that this company's lifeblood exists off of your attention. That's how they make money, period. End of story. So it makes sense to come from a company from a different perspective. You need a new paradigm, if that makes sense, in order to live out a truly healthy life. So that's why we started with something so drastically different. And there's a premium cost associated with that, but there's, it's like ad-free television, right? You got to pay for it.
Yeah. And let's talk about that. Let's talk about that drastic difference. Like, tell us about the Wise phone, and you're on Wise phone 2. So tell us about how you guys just kind of, took the phone back to the basics. And also, and this is a side note, this is kind of like, I know I shouldn't care about aesthetics, but I do. I like that the phone, like, people are not going to immediately know that you're like in minimalist mode. You know what I mean? The phone looks like everybody else's phone. Right. I can tell you our 17-year-old daughter really appreciates that. She doesn't want like a toddler phone in her hand. She just doesn't, she appreciates the protection, but she is 17. Yeah. And so that we can talk about that a little bit later, but let's talk about at a basic level how a Wise phone is different.
Well, yeah, and just a quick comment on the visuals. We talk to kids, and kids don't want kids' phones. I'm serious; they don't. Like even the toddler, the 2-year-old, you give them a Wood Kids phone or your iPhone. That's a no-brainer. Which one they want?
That's right.
So that was a very intentional thing. Even the light phone, another minimalist phone, is small and it's unique, but it has a weird factor to it. So you pull it out and you're like, it incites questions. So that was by design. But the difference, so first of all, fundamentally at the deepest level, philosophically, we have a different purpose. And the investors in the company, in Techless, have a different purpose. I asked our venture capital guys, these are the guys that expect classically 100x unicorn returns. I want to exit in 6 years and make $1 billion. That's the normal Silicon Valley venture capital guys. I asked our guys before we took their check they led our finance round. I said, hey, if Techless exists in 30 years, you don't have an exit, but we're meaningfully changing lives in powerful ways and shifting culture. Are you okay with your cash staying in here? And they said, bring it on, Chris. We would love that. It would be overjoyed. So the team internally, the investors, everyone is focused and unified on a very different purpose. And we care about the people that were doing it. So there's like the overarching umbrella. Okay. So you can trust that.
It's good.
And I think there's redemption in the financing space that other companies could leverage as well. So anyways, that's that. And then when it comes down to specific user experience design things that we're doing, we have some very intentional guidelines around how we do what we do. I mean, little details, or big details. Like one thing we say, hey, the phone is 99.99% porn free. We're going to continue to add functionality. It can, as literally over the next 6 months, Wise Phone 2 is going to have a lot more than it does right now today. As we add that functionality, we are rolling things out as we can maintain that purity standard. And so I don't know of a phone or that's a little crazy, honestly. I don't think anyone else thinks that way or talks that way. In fact, YouTube used to have parental controls and they just defeatured it. They just took it out. So now you have YouTube Kids for 4-year-olds, and then you have full blown anything you want to see. There's no middle ground. So there's one of the guarantees. The other one we just have is our monetization structure. First of all, we haven't actually turned a profit ever. Techless hasn't. We've been burning cash. Our goal is to break even as an organization. But we have a premium that we charge for the service. And that means we are upfront and above the table and transparent about our pricing model instead of monetizing your attention. And what that means is that we can flip the incentive models even for developers. So for example, we have other third-party tools on the platform. We're going to allow banking apps and some stuff like that. Google and Apple, right now, those developers make more money the more time you spend on it. We can actually reverse incentivize them because we own the tool drawer, we own the store. We could say, hey, users start exploiting attention or start hitting them with notifications they don't need. We start demonetizing them. So we have control at that level to push people towards healthier habits. So I don't know if that's a good high level overview, but there's some.
No, I think it is. I think because here I will say, just as parents, what we want to know is that we are not being a detriment to our children when we give them a device. I mean, I just, for us personally, it was just our strong conviction that our kids are not going to get phones. We are culture watchers. We are doing the research. We're reading the stories. We understand the oops. We've had parents reach out to us over the years. This oops happened, and now my son has an addiction. This oops happened, and now you know what I mean. And
you're a decade ahead of the curve. It's awesome. Man. I mean, people are going there, but you guys are the visionaries right now. So keep it up.
Well, praise God. Well, but you know what? Here's the thing, and this is why we appreciate Techless, because it doesn't matter how much vision we have if we don't have any other recourse. You know what I mean? Like, there's only a matter of time before you are kind of worn down. You're like, well, what am I going to do? My kid is driving. I don't want my kid out there trying to send smoke signals. My kid's going to need to have a device. You're on the side of the road. I need to know that. But now I think the blessing for parents, so many parents, and I will say this, and this has been really cool, and I don't take it for granted, not even for a second. We've been very vocal about not giving our kids phones and being strategic about that. And so many people have nationally watched us to see how long are they going to hold out? When are they really serious about it? And
you're the poster, the icons.
Somebody literally said under one of our posts, when we finally announced that our oldest child was getting a phone, and it was a Techless phone, Wise Phone 2, someone said, man, thanks for holding out. Like, thanks for not bending. Thanks for not breaking, because it's awesome. Like, it gives them hope that we can do it. We don't have to be pressured into just doing what the culture wants. So.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, you guys are playing the same game. One of the things that we're doing right now. So people see, in this book I'm working on with Dr. Kathy Cook, we're talking about this concept, which is that the world is hyper connected, burnt out, whatever, just like we're all feeling that. Social media over, whole 9 yards, over digitized. Everyone sees the opposite side of the equation, which is the Luddite path. It's like, I'm going to reject it all, cut off everything, digital detox fast, just unplug my house. That's the extreme opposite. But you remain disconnected from the world. And so there's a very real, like, how do we navigate between these two extremes? And what we are really doing at Techless and the education and the book and the documentary we work on is we're trying to parse out. There's actually a middle path, which is where we are taking things and splitting them into, hey, this is good, this is bad, this is wonderful, this is not wonderful. And it's a very countercultural, no one's speaking about that right now, narrative. And you guys are doing the same thing, actually. And we're calling it the healthy tech path. But like, I mean, you could pull apart almost anything. I mean, for example, privacy. You have people that are, who cares? I'll post my life to social media. And you have the extreme privacy, like I don't have a Wi-Fi at my house and I wear a tinfoil hat. You know, like I just you know, I paid $2,000 for some crazy encrypted hardware phone. I mean, like there's both extremes.
Yes.
I believe in corporate privacy, government and big corporations, and interpersonal radical transparency. That's a healthy tech path. Is like, I trust people and I have my inner circle, but I'm not posting it to the world. I mean, like, that's just different. And we take that across many different facets. And you guys are doing the exact same thing in your parenting, but it is a conundrum that you guys are facing. And it's a conundrum that the world is facing. We're trying to make it a little bit easier. So
yeah,
it's good.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me this then, as you look at, and I'm sure you guys have to do this for research purposes, like where is the average adult? Because we do focus on children, and I think this is so important because they almost, I mean, they need to be protected. That's just a given. But where is the average adult as far as device addiction goes? Because I think sometimes we don't want to talk about it. It's uncomfortable. You know, we started out trying to, you know, make ourselves comfortable with technology. And then maybe for some of us, it's true that it took over our life, that you never got a weekend, you never got evenings. What are some of the stats, you know, as far as where we are right now as a culture?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm so glad you brought this up. We hired an expert to come and speak at the Shiner schools, the town I'm in, and spoke per grade to fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade, seventh grade, an hour to each, did surveys around them. Anyways, a really, really wonderful expert. She does this all around the nation all the time. And I got to speak with her on my own podcast for 2 hours, and she is furious with parents. Like, she hates them. I'm kind of exaggerating, not really. But the reason why is because the hypocrisy of our expectations for healthy should be just for our kids and not for ourselves. The inauthenticity of that is just drives up a wall. Her eye twitches over that. So the fact that you're asking that question is really good. And I think we need to own this stuff ourselves first. And so high level, I was pulling up a quick study. There was a Deloitte study in 2024. This is 2 years ago. 38% of adults think that they self-claim and say that they're addicted to their screens and they want something different. This is in the United States. So that's a lot that I self-identify. And I'm guessing there's a whole lot more that actually don't self-identify. 59% of teens claim the same thing. And we're looking at a 4.5 hour average screen time. This was Deloitte, you know, this was 110 million, like a very large study. So that's the reality. And I think beyond the statistics, we see a cultural shift. And it started about 4 or 5 years ago with social media. The social dilemma came out of social media. But I think that was the peak, the tip of the iceberg. Congress, now it's popular to get down on Facebook. But I think actually people are going to start to realize, hey, it's more than that. It's technology in general, and something's out of whack. And just like we went through the same thing with smoking, it was wonderful when it first came out and everyone was smoking, and then wait, it's killing us and cancer. Right. And then the same thing with fast food. It was wonderful when it came out. Yeah. It's great. A hamburger for 5 cents. Yeah. And now we weigh 400 pounds and like, this isn't good. And I think we are actually right at the peak of technology usage. And I absolutely predict the next 20 years, people are going to, just like we think more about our food now. We eat organic. We eat at certain restaurants. We cook more at home than we did 10 years ago.
That's right.
Same thing's happening with technology. So there's the overarching shift, but we're at the peak and maybe even on the decline overarchingly here. So,
you know, I was just going to say, you know, it brings us back to what the scripture tells us about not being mastered by anything.
Right.
And I think that's at the core of it. You know, when we do inventory about anything in our lives, when we look at technology, we should be able to say, am I mastered by this? And to bring that before the Lord and for him to show us, you know, where we are, because a lot of times we may not want to be, but we may be.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Chris, let me ask you this then, you know, okay. So I think there are probably like two approaches. You could say you're looking at addiction in people. We know that people who eat fast food crave fast food. So there's a legitimate addiction. People who are, technology hogs crave technology. They've got to be on. There's this constant bell almost going off that tells them they need to check something. They need to do something. We don't just sit with our thoughts anymore. But there is also, I would say, a legitimate fear and fear is probably too strong a word, but there's a legitimate concern in making a shift to almost like minimalist living, right? There is a convenience factor. We have gotten so used to the things that we're used to that I think there are a fair amount of people who would say, I do want to reduce, but these apps kind of organize my life for me. Like, I just don't know how I would do anything different. What are you guys doing at Techless and with the Wise Phone to address that?
Man, you hit the nail on the head here. The number one excuse people have is always around convenience. Oh, I would do this, but I need blank. And I'll being frank, 95% of the time you don't need. Sometimes you do. My wife, honestly, she's not addicted to her phone. We have 6 kids. She needs her dang smartphone. Okay. I'll be vulnerable. I am prone to technology addiction and I need this. I need this system. I need this boundary in my own life. But you really did. You got some wisdom and some insight onto that. I would say convenience is the number one excuse that people have for justifying unhealthy living and justifying their own selfishness, their own whatever that looks like. And I would go back to the food analogy or being mastered of, like back to food. Is convenient food good for us? People have a paradigm of taking on inconvenience because this is killing me. This is killing my body. I'm going to go out of my way. I'm going to cook meals. I'm not going to eat this diet. I'm going to stay away from salt, whatever. We pay extra money, time, effort, energy. We talk at length. There's seminar, podcasts, all the stuff around food. And we take on inconvenience because we understand the value of it. This technology is killing our minds and it's killing our spirits. And we do not have a paradigm for taking on inconvenience when it comes to this yet. It's coming. People are willing to come to it, but there is a degree of sacrifice that you should be willing to take, be it in order to live a healthy life, mentally and spiritually. There's a discipline that we should have that we don't have, and it's not normal thinking right now. So I want to blow that out of the water and say maybe you have to do some things that are inconvenient, and that's the right path. So
I like that. I like that, and I like the parallel, and I like that it's a bold parallel that makes sense, because what we had in our country was we had an information mission that we would tell people, hey, this is what's really in your food. This is what you're really eating. You've got French fries that can make it on the counter for 6 years. Those are probably not French fries, I think when people started seeing that stuff and it became second nature to us, we started avoiding things almost because you're like, man, I do want it to actually be food. And so I think it sounds like what your mission is at Techless is one of information. It's a ministry, right? Like you are trying to rescue people from this death of convenience, or even maybe the facade of it. But you're absolutely right. I will spend 20 minutes chopping up vegetables if they're real vegetables. You know what I mean? Just to know that what I'm getting is good. And so I think people have to be convinced of that. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I will take the time to talk to someone face to face instead of a text message. I will, I could go down a list of inconveniences potentially. I will take the time to actually go and walk to my computer and open up my laptop to check my email instead of lounging on my bed and sitting here like this. That's inconvenient, but it's healthy for us. It puts boundaries around it. And there's a physical anyway. So
look, stop meddling. Get out of people's homes, Chris. Like, get out of our homes.
Well, I'm talking to myself. That's the thing. It's not impersonal. I'm not judging you. But so I will say, you back to the mission of Techless. We actually internally, we don't share this broadly, but our goal is to lead people to live fully with healthy technology. And that includes creating the tech. It also includes educating them around it. So we're doing both, but we're leading people. We have a vision for what healthy technology looks like. Code word, that is God's design for technology, which is a very underdeveloped discussion. And that's what we're on to. So you're on to us.
Man, I'm so happy.
awesome.
Like this brings me
This is
so much
great.
joy.
Yeah.
I love business. I love businessry. That's what it
Businessry.
is, right? I
Yes.
love it.
That's
I love that
awesome.
I love it. I just love it. I think it's great. So,
Yeah.
Chris, tell our listeners how they can connect with Techless. Where can they go? They're listening. They need that Wise Phone 2 in their life. They want to get your podcast. They want to learn more about what you're doing and your mission. How can they learn that?
Yeah, that's great. Simple. Go to techless.com. We have all the information you need on Wise Phone there. We are just starting to ship Wise Phone 2 in tranches, so it's coming out. You might be able to get one before Christmas. Like, that's where we're at. But yeah, techless.com has the information, pricing, all the product information. Our customer service is world-class, like 99.97% customer satisfaction rate. Better Business Bureau A+. Like, we have a really good team. So
Awesome.
that's where they can go to find more information. The podcast is unpublished yet, but we're going to call it the Doom Scroll Podcast, I think. We've already filmed about 5 episodes. And so, and we're working on a documentary called the Doom Scroll documentary. It has theatrical release in 1,000 theaters already. And it's some of the guys that just came out with a doc in October that was the top grossing doc in the last 10 years. Amazing film studio, a project called After Death. So if you hear the word Doom Scroll coming around, that's us behind the scenes. But we're working hard on it. So
man, this is good. Chris, thank you so much.
Thank
we really
you.
do appreciate you taking the time. We like to wrap up with a question, just a final thought here. Tell us something, and you may have already alluded to this, but just final thoughts, something that you're reading in God's word that is encouraging you, challenging you, maybe rebuking you, or training you in righteousness right now.
Yeah, I did mention at the beginning of this podcast episode, we were reading the 1 Corinthians, and that church, they were arguing about baptism and which leader they should follow. And I had a sincere conviction to quit the petty theological squabbles that are actually over meaningful theology with some just dear friends, brothers in Christ, and look beyond that and celebrate the unity of the gospel with one another. And so I'm reflecting on what that means for myself, but just we should not be at odds. Paul called out the church for that. And there's a lot of at oddsness in the church communities that I'm part of. Not horrible, not toxic, but just not unified either. And so that's my personal conviction at this moment. So,
man, thank you so much, Chris. We appreciate you taking the time to join us to talk about the Wise Phone, talk about your mission, talk about Techless. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Yeah, you guys are heroes in my mind. You are leading the charge in intentionality, healthy technology, but much more than that. So we're kindred spirits. Thank you for what you do. It's been an honor.
Oh, same here. God bless you.
Yep.
When we resist those cultural trends that rival the truth, we remain culture proof. Until next time, Lord willing,
God bless.